What's up, New Hope family? Welcome to the Grow Podcast. My name is David. With me, as always, is Pastor Mark. We're here to help you take a next step in your relationship with Jesus. I'm so glad you're here. Hello and welcome to episode 133 of the Grow Podcast. My name's David. I'm very glad you're with us. Pastor Mark is also here. I'm even more glad that you're with us because I don't know what I would do if I was sitting here by myself for the next half hour. That would be scary for everybody involved.
I would wonder what you might do. That's what would scare me, yes.
I'm clearly not allowed to record a podcast by myself. I think that's smart. That's a good rule. Pastor Mike put that rule in, and you've carried it over.
I'm very happy to support what he has done.
So am I, actually. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to do this by myself. Oh, man. Happy... Three Kings Day, or it just passed, right? Am I correct? When we're recording this?
Yes.
Yeah.
It has just passed.
We've talked about it on this before, I believe. I know we talked about it on the lobby. I think we talked about it a little bit on the Grow Podcast, but not some. What's the other name for it?
Epiphany.
Epiphany.
Mm-hmm.
Not a normal North Dakota celebration.
No, not too often.
And even because Boxing Day is a huge deal in Australia, where I was born, and it's in Canada as well, which is like our hat. If you're confused about where Canada is,
I know where.
You're very close to it right now.
We are.
Have you visited Canada since you've been in Williston?
The weather feels like we are very close to it.
Just wait a couple days from now, you're going to really get to experience Williston properly, Pastor Mark.
Yes.
Yeah. When you start seeing the high with a dash next to it, you're like, negative for the high.
Yes,
those are going to be fun days.
High today.
And then you get really lucky when you have that, and it's also like, it just happens to be like the 20-mile-per-hour wind day. It's good times.
I can handle the cold, but when it starts blowing, that just blows right through you.
It's awful. But we have Boxing Day's kind of been a thing in my brain my whole life, but never Epiphany or Three Kings. Mm-hmm. Is it like a Catholic, more celebrated in Catholic areas?
I don't know if it's Catholic. I know it was in Latino areas.
Yeah, because I know it's a bigger deal in Mexico as well.
Yeah.
I was talking to a friend of mine from Mexico, and they also celebrate that, which I didn't know. And it's a big deal for you because you were born in Puerto Rico.
Early years.
Or maybe not born, but you were in Puerto Rico. Here we only get presents the one time. What a shame. What a shame. That's the thing. We had Boxing Day. I never got presents on Boxing Day. It was just like, hey, it's Boxing Day. And I was like, oh, okay. Like everyone back in Australia was really excited. I don't know. Having parades.
It's probably not the time, but I really would like to know what is Boxing Day and what does boxing have to do with anything.
It's not
we don't need to
it's
cover
not like,
that
you
now.
know, what Hattie likes to do, like she wants a punching bag in the office.
Yes.
It's not that type of boxing, I believe. But I'm certainly no expert on Boxing Day anymore. When I was a kid, I think I knew a lot more about it. Now I'm old and I've deleted that part of my memory.
Wait till you get to my age. There's so much that I have deleted.
I've deleted that.
It is amazing.
I've deleted that part of my memory to remember that your name is Mark and not Mike. And even that I get wrong sometimes. So
yes, you did that today, by the way.
Yesterday. Wasn't it yesterday? Was it today?
I don't know. It's today, yes.
Well, you win some, you lose some. It's your fault for coming to a place where your name is almost the same as the last guy that was here.
Yeah, it's all my fault. I take full responsibility.
You should have changed your name before you came here.
Of course. If you were going to make so much sense.
So if district superintendent guy is like, hey, you got to go do this, and God was clearly like, Mark, this is where you need to go. Mm-hmm. But the one caveat, you have to change your first name while you're there. What name would you pick?
Matthew.
Matthew. Is that your middle name or just...
No, I don't know. It just came to my head.
It comes
right
before
now.
Mark in the Gospels?
Yes. I could keep it consistent in the Gospels.
I like that. Well, shockingly, once again, we're in the book of Mark this week because you're very egotistical.
My favorite book. It really is.
Now, would it be your favorite book if your name was Carl?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because I like the way that the Gospel of Mark tells the stories.
Sure.
It shortens it up. The other Gospels lengthen it some, but Mark has more of a snapshot picture,
succinct.
and you can get succinct. That's a good word for it.
So we're in. This was week 3. Again, as always, if you missed the weekend teaching, definitely go check that out, either on our website or on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/New Hope Here. we definitely want to encourage you to catch up on the weekend teaching, especially in this series as we're learning a lot about the church and then like us as New Hope and what our mission is and what each of us who considers ourselves a part of New Hope, how we are the church and what does that look like for us. So definitely want to encourage you to check that out if you missed it. But this week we were talking about grow, which is one of our 3 words.
Yes.
Go, grow, and give. I mean, we say more words than that here at New Hope.
But we really emphasize
but we emphasize those 3 a lot. And so we were on grow. So we were in Mark chapter 3, verses 13 through 19 is where you were teaching out of. You talked about how Jesus selected 12 disciples early on in your sermon. And this is kind of apropos of nothing because it's not necessarily a big part of like what we were specifically talking about. But I mean, it kind of is because you were talking about the importance of small groups, and that's Jesus selecting his small group. Mm-hmm. But like the selection of the 12 specifically, when, as you mentioned, like we know that there were more than that consistently followed him.
Right.
Not just like, oh yeah, like I like that Jesus guy when he comes through town, but like they were following him the same way. But it seems so excluding of the other X number that weren't in the 12, right? So we learn about Matthias later on, right? Who kind of replaces Judas once Judas betrays Jesus and is no longer alive. And but like if you're Matthias, you're like, well, I've been around for the last 3 years. Like, why now? What's like, so, and maybe in the context of small groups, I guess maybe you can look at it that way. But why should we make these smaller groups where we seem like we're excluding those who aren't a part of my special group? Kind of, and that's kind of
well, you can take it farther with Jesus, because when he had really intense things that were going on, the Transfiguration, Gethsemane, he pulled Peter, James, and John aside, and so they were kind of an inner circle of him. I think it's just the way that life works. There are people that you are closest to, and people that you're not, that are your close friends but wouldn't be in your inner circle. And that's just the way life is. And I think Jesus' example of doing that is like, oh, I don't have to give equal time to everybody and that sort of thing. But we see in Jesus' life, he's always inclusive. He's always an open-armed type of thing, including people, not a shoving people away. And so wherever the people fell in that, they were included. A lot of women feel like, well, Jesus was sexist because he didn't have women in the 12, but yet we saw in that he was so anti-cultural of including women and mentioning them in the gospel and talking with them and relating to them, which was so much more than the culture of the day of what they were experiencing. And so I think he was very inclusive. But we're also limited, and he was limited by his physical body, of how much time you have, how much you can impact people, and it's just the nature of life that there are some that you click with, and that's one of the things with small groups that is a challenge with it, because often the church sets up small groups because of all the things that we talked about, the value of that and the building of relationships. I have been in small groups that were really just great and you related. I've also been in small groups that didn't work. I mean, they were good people and I liked them and we were friends, but we just didn't click. And I think that's just the nature of relationships, that there are some people that we meet and we go, oh, David, I like David. We could hang out together. There are others that you go, well, yeah, I don't dislike them in any way, but somehow it just doesn't quite click.
They're not the person I'm going to choose to spend my free time with.
And that's one of the challenges of small groups, is that you're supposed to do this and so you make it happen. But if it doesn't click, okay, that was a season. We can move on from that. I can move to a different group or build a different group around me or join a different group, whatever that looks like. And it's not like, oh, I'm in this group and we're supposed to do life together. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. That doesn't mean you throw out small groups and we don't do it.
That's the big part.
It does mean that, okay, let's find one that does work, because it's all about that relationship. And the more you're connected connected with people, the more accountability is going to take place, the more you're going to enjoy life and ministry together.
Yeah. Excuse me. My wife and I, the first small group we did after we were married, I still love the people that were in that group, our leaders from that group and the two other couples that were in that group. But it wasn't like, it wasn't a good match. Like, we weren't super comfortable, like you were saying, like sharing life together and going and talking about all those things. We just didn't click in that way. When we would see them on Sunday, when we go back, if we see them, it's still a hug and I love you and how you doing. But then our next small group, like that became like our family, and it still is like our family, that small group. And that sometimes that's what it takes. Like sometimes it might be 3 or 4 groups where you're like, I'm still going to do this because I know I need the spiritual growth that I'm going to still get, even though it's not like, oh, I've just met all my best friends forever. But yeah, it might be your next group that, where God brings those type of relationships in your life. And he's certainly not surprised when you get in that small group and you're like, well, this doesn't fit. And God's like, what? Oh, my word, I screwed up. I sent him or her to the wrong group. Like, he's aware. And maybe there's something you're supposed to learn while you're with that group that's going to make it easier for you in your next group or whatever.
And this is one of the characteristics of the organized church. I mean, we're talking about be the church, love the church, all that sort of thing. But one of the characteristics that happens in the organized church is if we are not doing ministry, then the church decides to organize ministry for it to happen. So with small groups, if we're not getting ourselves in a relational group where we're interacting and being able to share together and all of that, well, then the church, okay, let's help you. Let's find groups, let's start groups, let's get those together. And some work and some don't. Same thing in any area of ministry. If somebody walks into the door of our worship, comes into the library, I'm trying to say lobby.
The lobby.
Yeah,
the lobby.
Not
You've been
the
struggling with the
library
lobby lately.
They come into the lobby. Well, the church naturally is a welcoming, loving people, and so we expect people to welcome them.
Right.
Well, we don't do that.
Yeah.
And so the church organizes that, says, okay, we're going to have a greeter team now, and you are responsible to greet people. Yeah. Well, genuinely, people are greeted, but it's not quite the same.
Sure.
And so we as a church do the best that we can to organize what we should be doing without being organized.
Right.
But if it just doesn't happen, and some people need that catalyst to be involved in some of those things. So we try to match people up doing the things that fit them and make that happen. But it's just the nature of organization. Yeah. It doesn't always work well.
Yeah.
It's intended to be an assistance to make things happen when we're having trouble making them happen.
Let's talk more about things that don't always work well. You talked about you playing pickleball.
Yes. Okay. Now, I am not sure what things not working well and me playing pickleball have to do with each other.
Now, I've watched you play pickleball once. And I think we should break down your pickleball skills a little bit here on the podcast.
I think we're ready to move on to the next question.
All right, we'll move on to accountability. That's more fun. Actually, I want to backtrack a little bit because you mentioned it briefly, but I had it in my notes. You talked about the kind of focus that Jesus had on women in comparison to the culture of the time. And I think you even said, sometimes a woman might look at Jesus and the 12 disciples, and it's just the same old thing. It's just a bunch of men doing their thing, and we're left out. There's a couple women, and they're mentioned briefly, but they're not Peter, they're not John. Yep. But that's why so often understanding the historical context of things is so important, because
really is.
The emphasis that Jesus put on women and the closeness that he was willing to have these women to him in his ministry was so opposite of what would have been the norm and even acceptable at the time. You even think of the woman who touches his cloak to get healed. He should have scolded her and you don't just go up and touch a man, especially a teacher. That's so unacceptable. And instead he loves her and tells her that she did the right thing. And it's just so different what he was doing.
And in our culture today, women coming into that and reading the scripture going, wow, Christianity and the Bible is so sexist. I mean, it's so anti-women. It's like, do you realize how much it exalted women in a culture that never, ever in any way did that before? So Jesus was so countercultural and so pro-women.
And then his church, right after he leaves, there were female leaders of the early church as well. And again, like, we don't have a letter written by them, but just the places that they were in authority in his church early on, it was so unbelievably different in that world. And so I thought you touched on it really well in your message.
And referencing a couple in the church that were leaders in the church, Priscilla and Aquila, mentions the woman first. I mean, to us, like, which doesn't make any difference. Grandma, grandpa, it doesn't matter. They're both the same. But in that culture, to refer to a couple and have her name first was just like unheard of.
Well, and even just some of the women that he was willing to interact with, right? You had the woman caught in adultery, and he stands up for her. I mean, not only would it not be normal for a man to stand up for a woman in almost any context at that time, but especially the woman caught in adultery. Like, you don't go tie yourself to that woman. And then the Samaritan woman, where he rattles off all the different marriages she's had, and now she's with a man who's not her husband. But those are the women that Jesus, not exclusively, but some of the women that Jesus chose to be close with. And you're just like, man, he was so different than anything they would have been familiar with, especially a religious teacher. I mean, it's just completely opposite. And even in the pagan religions at the time, women's place in most pagan religions was very sexual. Like, if you were going to be an important person in this religion, it's because, well, you're, a priestess at this temple, and your job is to
satisfy.
Yes, there you go. Way to keep it PG here for the Grow Podcast.
I do my best.
So again, it's just so different. But I want to let's jump back right after your pickleball, unless you want to dive deeper into pickleball.
No, I think we covered that well.
Accountability.
I still don't know what we were saying about that, but we've covered it plenty well.
Accountability. You talked about how that's one of the things that can happen in a small group, and one of the important things of a small group. But can't that be a thing that ruins a small group? Like, I don't like everybody here constantly judging me for all of the things that I'm doing, or they know too much about my life, and I don't want to be in this group anymore.
Definitely, and it depends on the depth of the relationship.
Sure.
Challenging anybody, holding them accountable is all based on relationship. You don't know somebody and you get in their face, I mean, it's over. I don't have to put up with this. I don't know you. If I know you well enough to know that you really love me, you can get away with a lot of stuff. I remember the first church that I pastored, I was 24, and my wife and I were the youngest adults, youngest married couple in the church, and we had a lady that would be almost 2 generations older, an older lady in the church. And after church, sometimes she'd come through, and I'd be standing at the door, and she'd come shake my hand and say, Pastor, I think you were just totally wrong on this. And I mean, she just, I think, I don't agree with you on this. And there was never any tension with any of that, because I knew that Laura loved me.
Yeah.
And I knew if she was getting after me in some way or disagreeing with me, it did not affect our relationship. She was not intending to harm me or to hurt me, hurt my feelings. She was just sharing what she thought, and our relationship would be strong after we had that discussion, and I could say, I know I'm right. and we were fine. Because we had that relationship. And that's what comes out of the small groups, is you build enough of the relationship that you can do the accountability, that you can disagree, that you can get in each other's faces a little bit, because it's safe. I know that when we're done, we are still in relationship, and we're okay.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things you can't rush, right? Like we're starting a new small group, or I'm joining a new small group, or someone new is joining my small group. You have to understand that, like, how long have you been the pastor here, Pastor Mark?
4 months.
4 months. So 4 months ago, my relationship with you was not like it was with Pastor Mike, who had been my pastor for whatever, 5 years, and I had worked for him for 3. We couldn't have the same kind of interactions that I had with him and the same conversations that I had with him. It wouldn't make sense. I wasn't comfortable. You wouldn't have been comfortable, and nothing positive would have come out of any sort of that type of challenging conversation or friendly conversation. We've talked about those before. Yep. How we tease each other all the time now, whereas your first week here, if you would have shown up and just made fun of me the whole first week, I'd have been like, okay, like, are we friends, or does this guy really not like me?
What does this mean? What's the motivation? What's behind
whereas
all
now
of this?
I know that it's love. And it's the same thing in your small group, where like that first week, if you and I were in a small group and a new guy joined our small group, we would need to ease him into the way we interact with each other. Because if we make fun of him the whole first week, he's going to be like, well, that was the worst day of my life. I never want to go back to that small group, because he doesn't understand.
And how open you can be. I mean, sharing stuff that I hurt. I want to make sure this is a safe place.
And so vulnerability was the next one that I had.
Before I share anything, I want to know it's not going anyplace else. I want to know I'm not going to be judged for that or condemned for that. I'm going to be loved through that. And we test all of those things by doing a little bit at a time, and that takes time. That's what the small group, this can happen over a period of time, is you build that trust, and I know this is a safe place. But you walk into a new location, walk into a new church, walk into a new relationship of any kind, that's not there automatically.
No.
I mean, you have to earn that. You have to build that. You have to find that out in relationship. But if you don't have the relationship, you don't ever get to find that out, and you just stay with all your hurts held to yourself, and you don't get the encouragement and the help that you need.
Yeah, I think that's the emphasis on relationship pretty much hits every point from your message, right? Like, sure, there's all these different things, but if we're skipping the relationship part of that small group, then none of the rest of that's going to happen, right? We're not going to have true accountability in our small group or with my friends if we don't have a real relationship. And then vulnerability was the next thing. I'm not going to be able to truly be vulnerable with you if we don't have that relationship. And that's why, it's okay if your small group like gets together one time and you hang out for 3 hours and you realize, boy, we didn't really spend enough time like on the study. Now, if you never talk about God, I'd be like, maybe we need to adjust your small group a little bit if that's what it's supposed to be centered around. But I've had like the best small groups I've ever been in. We've had so many nights where we're just like, we were just a family tonight. And we like conversations about God probably came up a whole bunch, and about our lives and things, but every once in a while we just need to grow in our relationship. And then the next week, when we really deep dive the video we're watching or the book we're reading or whatever it is, I now have so much more trust in you because I know you and you know me more, and I know you care about me because we just spent 3 hours caring about each other, and that's okay. And so
there's so much that you gain from relationship, and that's why the small group, why we talk about small groups, because if it's just me, I'm missing out on what comes out of relationships of those small groups or those one-on-ones or one-on-three or whatever, of building that. And also, you may be very involved in a church and show up every Sunday, but if you don't get into those kinds of relationships, you don't build on that, and you just can go and be in this anonymous in this big group of people, and I walk away, and that's not church. I mean, church is all about relationships because Jesus was all about relationships. He did not just do his ministry. He gathered these 12 men around him, and they built very intense, close relationships. And so that was the model that he gave to us of what the church is supposed to be like.
I want to touch on one more thing with vulnerability quick before we move on from that. Because vulnerability is really hard for some people. Some people might be too vulnerable. You're like, oh, I met you 5 minutes ago. Maybe we shouldn't be deep diving this part of your life.
TMI?
Oh, good.
TMI.
Wow. That was really good, Pastor. TMI, But on the contrary, and especially, where we live in North Dakota, a open with my feelings area of the world. Minnesota, where I'm from, is the exact same thing.
Right.
Very Scandinavian and German way of dealing with things. Push those emotions down until they come out in the form of an ulcer. Just bury them. But for some people, that might be a reason to avoid a small group. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be around people who will make me feel vulnerable, because maybe because I'm not comfortable, maybe because there's a part of my life that I don't want people to find out about, and people that get close to me are going to find out about it. So what would you say to somebody who when they hear vulnerability as a part of a small group, that's a reason for them to stay away?
With vulnerability, you always have the choice of how much you want to share. And if you are a person that comes out of a culture that we don't share things, we don't express our love to other people, we don't put things into words, we just feel them. And some cultures are that way more than others. Some are extremely expressive, some are not expressive. You can determine that yourself of how much that you open up. I mean, seldom are you going to get into groups where it goes around, okay, everybody share with us, what is your latest sin? I mean...
Please let us know in the comments if your group does that, though, because we might have Addie talk to your small group leader.
Most groups are not that way, because we all recognize, I mean, that's just life, the vulnerability and how open you are, that building of the trust, the building of the relationship all has to take place. And so... very seldom are you going to be forced into a situation where you have to be sharing something that you don't want to share. And so being in the group and risking that, there's so much that you gain, it is worth it. The feeling that awkwardness of, oh dear, they're going to expect more out of me than what I get. And you'll find in most groups, nearly all groups, as you get into it, it's like, oh, okay, this is not as touchy-feely or as, in-depth, or not, and that's not the right word, as exposing as we're afraid it might be for us.
You were talking later about how, ministry is done best in small teams. And again, I don't know exactly where my thought on this fits in, but it just really hit me while you were talking. So you talked about when he would have a teaching moment with the 12, right? And he would have them sit down and be able to teach them. And it just made me think of the pace control that you have with a small group versus a large, right? Like on Sunday morning, our service is regimented, right? It's okay. It starts at 9:30, and the first song is 5 minutes, and then the second song is 6 minutes, and then Pastor Mark's going to go up and talk for 2.5 minutes. Now, for especially that part, it doesn't always go the exact number of minutes. And I'm not just going to pick on you or if you give me a microphone and have me do the weekly highlights, who knows what's going to happen during that? But we have another service coming up at 11:15, like that. We have when Jesus is teaching the 5,000, he's just up there and there's this huge group and we just go. But when he's with his 12, they can stop in the middle of what they're doing and sit down and teach, and just that pace control that you have in that small group versus the large, where you can afford to stop what you're doing. And not like, I mean, you're the lead pastor, you can do whatever you want, but it would be very different on a Sunday morning for you to go interrupt a song well, you've done that before, but interrupt a song.
It's not that difficult.
Interrupt a song in the middle and just
kind of get up there at the wrong time and go, okay, now we're ready for this, and discover, oh, there was another verse. And I stepped in before that verse got done. Yeah, that has happened.
Yeah, that has happened. But not intentionally.
Not intentionally. But boy, it has happened.
I'm losing my voice here. I'm laughing so much. But it would be very abnormal to stop what we're doing in the middle of the service and just, we're just going to do something else. Or I just had, this random thought or whatever. But in a small group, that's especially a relational small group. Well, that's just normal. We're sitting and watching, this video, and we're going to answer questions later. Hey, you know what? Can we stop this quick? Because I just want to talk about this thing that happened to me this week that I was just reminded of that I need advice on, or was amazing, and I just want to share the joy that I had with you. Well, who cares? We'll pause it. There's 8 of us in the room. There's 12 of us in the room, whatever it is. and that just really hit me, that the control of the pace, because man, our lives are so regimented and rushed so often and busy. And in that small group, we get to just slow down and just be together. We can just sit down with Jesus like he was in that moment. I love that part of your message.
One of the things tied in with that, one of my previous roles was directing a camp, either as directing a specific youth camp or running an entire campground. And what I found was really unique is if we had a group of teenagers, of 250 teenagers, everything had to be much more regimented. We had to have control. We had to eat at certain times. We had to do everything much more regimented.
Yeah.
If I took a group of 8 or 12 teenagers and they're my kids and I know them, our schedule could be whatever. And we could adjust that and we could do what we wanted to do. We didn't need all of the schedule because it was just us. And same thing with a small group is you can arrange it to what needs to be done, not what needs to be done for the whole group, because it's going to be awkward. I mean, I've thought of that on a Sunday morning. Somebody's coming down to pray, and we're going on with the service after prayer time, and it's time for the message, and they're still at the in front praying. Man, I just want to stop everything and say, okay, we need to deal with this. Somebody's dealing with something, and just to go on with announcements or go on with the message or whatever. It's like something important is happening here, but we can't stop 300 people because one person, or we don't do that in a large setting. But in a small setting, man, we throw out the whole topic because somebody's coming today and is hurting and they're in tears and this just happened in their lives. Man, we just all can gather around them and stop everything and can really deal with life.
Imagine that same scenario in a small group where we we're about to start the video of the study we're watching, and person X just pours out their soul like this. They're just going through, and we're like,
say, thank you, but we're doing
we appreciate
this right
that, but it's time for the video. And they're just weeping while we press play. Ooh, interesting. What does Craig Rochelle have for us today? Well, they're just devastated in the corner. But again, that would seem weird in that small group context, because it would be weird in that small group context, because we do have the ability to just, no, we don't need to do that today. We need to love this person today. And that's again another one of the many advantages of small groups. One of the last things here, you talked about the verse from Matthew, not your favorite book, 18, where he says, if two of you on earth agree about anything you ask for, it will be done for you by the Father or by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 come together in my name, there I am with them. This is a verse I struggled with a lot when I was really depressed in college, because I did everything I could to not be around other people in college, other than just as much as I needed to be to try to trick people into thinking I wasn't depressed. And then that verse would, I mean, I've known that verse my whole life as a pastor's kid, and I went to a private school, so I've known that verse, and that one would drive me nuts because I was mad at God at the time. And I'd be like, well, you're not even with me because I'm here by myself. And I feel like we often misinterpret that verse as in, like, God's not with me if I'm by myself. But is that what it means? Like, if I'm at home right now listening to this podcast, or maybe I I don't have a church right now, I join New Hope here online or whatever, and I'm alone, and I read, where 2 or 3 come together in my name, there I am with them. It sounds like that means if I'm here by myself, then Jesus isn't with me.
I think there has to be that balance that we recognize. There is so much about Scripture that is individual. It is not my family has come to the Lord, so I'm a Christian. No, there is that personal relationship with Christ. I go to the right church, so I'm a Christian. No, we've emphasized the individual. You have to make a decision yourself, an individual decision. It's not just God loves everybody. God actually loves you. Firmly believe if you were the only person that were ever to live, would he die on the cross for you? Yes, I think he loves you that much. Even you. Even you. There is so much that is very intensely personal. A lot of my preaching in the last few months has been talking about you are God's favorite, and have come back to that time and time again. You are favored. I mean, you are his favorite. There's something so individual about the gospel that we emphasize that a lot, and it has to be emphasized. But what we're looking at here is also then there is some power in us doing life together.
Yep.
Doing spiritual life together. I believe that there is additional power that comes when the Holy Spirit is with me and the Holy Spirit is with you, and we come together, just kind of like it multiplies God's presence. Mm-hmm. And that's why very often we recognize God's presence in church or in a small group, because I think it's magnified that way. But that should not ever take away from the individual's relationship with the Lord and how much He died for me. Mm-hmm. He loves me. And even when I feel like nobody else likes me, I know He likes me. I mean, that's just this very intimate individual thing between God and me.
Yeah. One of my favorite lines from your sermon, whatever parts of your sermon, things you said in the sermon, was His presence is magnified when we're together. I just loved that. That was beautiful. I really liked that. You ended with, I'm going to do a New Hope Here plug for anybody who might not be around one of our physical campuses, just because you ended talking about, like, you can either wait for the church to organize small groups, or you can be the church and do it on your own. And we talked about this in our New Hope Here service this last Sunday, so yesterday, if you're listening the first day this is live. But we have a thing called New Hope Here gatherings, and if New Hope Here is your main church, like you're not near our Wilson campus or our Tioga campus or one of our church plants or whatever, and you don't have a home church, this has become your home church, we really, really encourage you to think about starting a gathering. We don't think you're meant to do this by yourself.
Absolutely.
And we have a process set up so you won't have to do that on your own. We'll be alongside you the whole way. I might not be physically next to you, but I will regularly be with you. And so I really want to encourage you to think about hosting a gathering if that's you. If you're somebody who's like, I'm not in church regularly, I watch on my phone, or I watch, maybe I put it on my TV or whatever. There are people in your life that you can do that with, that you can be inviting. And so anyway, I want you to think about that, consider that. Send me an email, David, D-A-V-E-D, David at newhopewilson.com. And we would always be happy to talk about that. And same thing with a small group. If you're not in a small group, if you attend one of our campuses and you're not in a small group, reach out to Pastor Hattie or go on our website, newhopehere.com/groups, and you can see all of the groups that are on there. And you can join most of them right from the website, and then you'll get all the information about where you need to go and who you need to talk to and where that group meets, because we are just not meant to do this by ourselves.
Right. And again, the church organizing groups is because we don't do that on our own.
Yeah, right.
And so ideally, as Christians, we are getting together, just like the early church did. Man, we just want to spend time together. We want to be together. So ideally, you do that. And the church comes alongside and says, okay, if you're having trouble doing that, we want to help you do that.
Yeah. Start your own group.
Absolutely. Start your own.
We can always use, and then invite people to join you. Don't start your own group and then be like, but I don't want anyone else there. My group is me.
It's me. Somehow that doesn't quite fit in the category of group.
I have a few discussion questions for you. We'd love to have you answer any of these in the comments. That would be awesome. Otherwise, just go through them on your own or with a group would be a great way to go through discussion questions. But before I do that, can we cut to Pastor Mark's close-up camera right now?
It's driving me nuts.
You've noticed the bug?
Absolutely. There's a ladybug walking across.
It's been on there for a while now, and I'm like, how has he not flicked this bug off?
This is, I'm trying not to, I'm thinking, I'm probably looking cross-eyed at this thing because it's just right at the end of my nose of this crazy bug. It's just, yes, I definitely knew that.
I don't want to make an old joke right now about your vision, but I was like, can he not see it? It's 2 inches from his face.
I was so impressed with how I was being able to handle this without anybody knowing, except every time I look at it, I'm going, I bet you on camera this looks cross-eyed because I'm just going to go this right here.
I just kept waiting for you to open your mouth to say something, and it just flies down your throat. I'm like, oh no. Oh boy.
Oh, how fun is that? Okay.
This is the Ladybug episode 133. Oh, man. Whew. That was great.
I
Usually
wonder
stuff
if
like
that was visible on the
I
camera.
mean,
if they
when I
could see
edit
that.
this, I will do everything I can to make sure it is. We will zoom in. And
Because I have seen that happen
man.
where somebody's got a fly walking, across
Yeah.
their
Yeah.
forehead or something. It's like, does he not know that is there?
I was trying to listen to you, but I'm just like watching it walk back and forth. I'm like, oh my word.
I was in the same boat.
Oh
Yep.
boy. So
Okay.
those discussion questions.
Yes.
Usually stuff like that happens at the beginning of the podcast, and now I'm thrown off. 4 discussion questions for you. 1, what actually constitutes a small group? Number 2, does it need to be an official group set up by the church? Pastor Mark kind of gave you the
We
answer to that.
talked
All right.
about that.
So you can sound really smart if you were listening closely. Again, you can always find these in the podcast notes or in the YouTube description. The discussion questions will always be in there. Question 3, does a small group always have to be religious in nature, like a Bible study or prayer group? You kind of touched on that in your message a little bit with pickleball.
Oh, yes.
Number 4, I've tried being part of a small group and we just didn't click. It became just one more responsibility without enjoyment. Why? Is there value in just adding one more thing to my schedule if it's not fulfilling? That's a very good question. I would love to hear some people's answers to that one. So we would love to hear your answers. We'd even more love to have you answer them with some other people. But that's part of the great thing about the comments. You can jump in the comments and answer a question, and then you can go read somebody else's answer and reply to them. And we can have a little bit of that community that we're looking for online here together on the Grow Podcast. So if you haven't subscribed yet, by the way, make sure you do that, whether you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Make sure you subscribe and then turn notifications on so you get notified when new episodes go live every single Monday morning at 6 a.m. You're probably up at 6 a.m. on Monday mornings. I am not.
Almost always.
Well, I'm hopefully not, depending on the children in my house. But thank you so much, all of you who listen, our New Hope family. We're just so thankful for you wanting to continue to grow, to dive deeper into Pastor Mark's messages every week. Thanks to you, Pastor Mark, for your teaching. I've found it to be so valuable. I know so many people in our church have as well. And thank you for your extended teaching here on the Grow Podcast and your apparently close relationship with ladybugs. You are the bug whisperer, and I'm very impressed. And then join us next time. Who knows what will happen on episode 134.
No telling.
So we love you, New Hope family, and we will see you next time.